Aloha! My name is Craig Nelson, and I am an assistant researcher with the Department of Oceanography at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. The University of Hawaii Seagrant College Program, otherwise known as Hawai'i Seagrant, is based at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in Honolulu, Hawaii. Hawai'i Seagrant supports an innovative program of research, education, and extension services directed to the improved understanding and stewardship of coastal and marine resources of the state, region, and nation. Hawai'i Seagrant Podcast Number 5, the 2 to 3 Day Rule.
Aloha, and welcome to our 321 podcast. My name is Mahealani.
This is Rachel.
This is Craig.
And I'm Krissy.
And we are part of Hawai'i Seagrant and the University of Hawaii located in Honolulu, Hawaii.
This podcast features research supported by Hawai'i Seagrant. Each episode will highlight a new project and the people that make that project possible.
We will ask these researchers for 3 words that describe their research. Give them 2 minutes to explain how their research benefits communities here in Hawaii, and end by asking them to provide one thing they know about each other than their research. So 3 words, 2 minutes, and 1 thing. It's a 321 podcast.
Wow, so where did all of this rain come from?
Yeah, I know, right? I thought we were done with the wet season.
A cold snap in Hawaii means it's 60 degrees.
And it rains.
Yeah, well, I'm freezing.
So after all that rain, is it safe to go back in the water right away?
I've heard it takes 2 to 3 days for the water to clear up, but is that true?
Well, maybe.
I mean, it depends on where you want to swim.
All right. So what are 3 words that describe your research?
I like to think of it as a microbial whodunit.
Who done what? Who done it? All right, we'll go with it. 3 words that you use to describe your research are microbial whodunit. I love that. Explain to me why you chose those 3 words.
I think of it as, after we have these big rain events or we have a big storm, oftentimes we see that the water is now brown or it's somehow discolored or maybe it's cloudier than it used to be. And we would like to know where that brown color has come from and maybe what is coming with it.
We're learning about water in this podcast, specifically coastal runoff and how it affects coastal water conditions in Hawaii. Here to share their research are Dr. Craig Nelson and his graduate student, Krissy Remple.
Before we ask you how your research benefits communities here in Hawaii, let's talk about a few scientific words. So 3 words that you use a lot in your research are microbial, contaminants, and tracking. Can you explain what these words mean?
Sure. So let's start with contaminants. A contaminant is anything that is in the water that we don't want in the water. So oftentimes we think of this as maybe chemical pollution or nutrient pollution. For us, we're interested in nutrient pollution or maybe poo.
To put it bluntly.
So microbial is anything that's having to do with microorganisms. And microorganisms are organisms that are too small to be seen with the naked eye. So we need to look with a microscope or somehow aid our vision to be able to find them. Oftentimes we think of bacteria, but also we could be talking about archaea or viruses.
So when you talk about a microbe, you're referring to something that's a plant or something that's an animal?
It's the 3rd kind of organism on the planet.
Okay.
So most of the diversity on this planet is from the microbes, and they're all single cells. So plants and animals have lots of cells, and microbes are just one single cell for the whole organism. And we can't see them, and that's why we call them microbes.
All right, and the last word is tracking.
So tracking, because if we find a contaminant in the water, then we'd like to know where it came from. And so we'd like to be able to track that contaminant using microbes.
So tell us in 2 minutes or less how your research benefits the communities in Hawaii.
So people who live near the ocean or any body of water, are always concerned about the quality of their water and whether it's clean or not. When we go down to do our work and collect samples from the water and look and see what's in those samples, we invariably get people wandering up, sometimes they're tourists and sometimes they're locals, and asking us, is the water safe? Is the water clean? And clean water is a service that we all deserve and we all require to live. And one of the things that this research does or seeks to do is to try to determine when our water is clean enough for us to use it for drinking, for harvesting food, or for recreating.
So let's recap. When asked to provide 3 words that describe your research, you said microbial whodunit. You provided definitions for 3 scientific words that are commonly used in your research. These words were microbial, contaminants, and tracking. We've learned about your research and how your research will help communities here in Hawaii. So let's get technical. How do you do your research?
So for us, we can go out into the environment and get a water sample. And then we can take that water sample back to the lab and filter the water onto a paper filter, which is really small, we call them pores in them. And that allows the water to go through, but keeps all of the bacteria or the microorganisms on the paper filter. We then put that filter into a tube and break apart all of the cells, including the paper, but all of the bacterial cells in there, and that allows the DNA to come out of each cell.
So what is the pore size of that, like on that filter?
So the filter has little round holes in it, and each hole is 0.2 microns. And just to give you some idea, the hair on your head, the diameter is about 10 to 20 microns. So these are about 20 to 100 times smaller. And that's about the size of most of the bacteria in the world, is around a micron.
Okay, so now that you have your sample, when you go back to the lab, what do you do?
Right, so we filtered the sample, we have all of our bacteria, we've lysed all the cells, so we broke all of the cells open, and now we have the DNA out. And you'll remember that the DNA is our genetic code, and so we have different sequences that encode for different genes and do different things. So now we will use that genetic sequence. We'll target a specific sequence that tells us which bacteria we have. So we like to look for human-specific gut bacteria, and that would tell us if we had sewage contamination in the water.
Right, because it came from someone's gut.
Because it came from someone's gut. Alternatively, we could look for general gut bacteria, and that would be, do we have poop in the water from any animal at all? Or we could look for other types of animals. So maybe we would want to look for cows or things that have rumen, right? Like these have different gut bacteria and different bacterial sequences that go along with that.
Well, that's a wrap. But before we go, we want to ask you, Craig, what is one thing you know about Krissy other than her research?
So I hired Krissy, and she doesn't know this, but I hired her because she grew up working in a restaurant. And people who work in restaurants usually make the best scientists. They've got what we call good lab hands. And they also know how to do a lot of different things at once.
Pass on the right? Is that it? In the lab, pass on the right?
Yeah, behind you, reaching
Behind
across you.
Reaching across?
I see you've worked in a restaurant.
Does it matter what cuisine?
It does not. The only thing is waiting tables doesn't really cut it. You have to have at least been involved in the kitchen.
Okay. And Krissy, what's one thing you know about Craig other than his research?
Well, I just learned this morning that Craig was an English major in his undergraduate, which I thought was interesting.
That doesn't make sense.
What happened?
Well, when I was in college, I was forced to read too much Shakespeare. So I finished the degree and I was an English major, But after that, I moved on to some of my secondary interests, which were biology and geology.
Oh, A2, Craig. Stay tuned for our next podcast, and mahalo for listening. Aloha.
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 This Hawai'i Sea Grant 321 podcast featured 3 songs. Happiness by bensound.com, Ukulele by bensound.com, and Cute by bensound.com. Find it on iTunes or bensound.com.